What's going on, YouTube? It's your boy Lonnie Reacts, and today we are back with another reaction video. Now, this video is titled "Top 3 Strangest Paths to Glory" by MrBallen. We just recently reacted to one of MrBallen's videos earlier. It was very disturbing and had me on edge, as all of these videos always do. But dude is an amazing YouTuber, one of my favorite YouTubers. I've been following him for some years now. Just I'm so proud of him, bro. Dude is at 10 million subs. Just he deserves it. But as usual, man, I don't have too much to say. Let's just jump into this video and get scared at 1:46 a.m., man. I don't even know why I'm doing this to myself.
Today, I'm going to share 3 stories about real people who, at some point in their lives, made choices that at the time seemed sort of insignificant, but over time, those choices would drastically not only change their lives, but in some cases, the lives of millions and millions of other people as well. But before we get into today's stories, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place because that's all we do and we upload once a week. So if that's of interest to you, please sneak into the like button's house and replace all their toilet paper with sandpaper. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on
When I
all
first started watching
notifications.
MrBallen years ago, whenever he do that goofy shit, when he just say random stuff, I used to be so confused, like what? But it's basically a tradition now. He just does it every video.
So you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Okay, let's get into today's stories.
The stripper's advice.
In the spring of 1986, a 22-year-old man named Will walked across the campus of the University of Missouri. Will was just a few months away from graduating from that university with a bachelor's degree in journalism. But recently, he was starting to feel like he actually didn't want to be a journalist after all. He didn't have any real passion for journalism. However, he did have passion for Hollywood movies. Will had lived in Missouri his whole life, and now he was, going to college in Missouri as well, so he was pretty sheltered, hadn't really gone anywhere. So for him, movies had sort of been like this magical portal into a different world. Hollywood would show him all these amazing places and people, and so that was his escape. He loved Hollywood movies. And so, with Will's senior year coming to a close in just a few months, with, real life right there on the horizon, Will sort of had this big revelation that he simply didn't want to be a journalist. And in fact, what he was going to do is just drop out of college, literally weeks away from his degree, and move to California, to Hollywood, to actually pursue being an actor in Hollywood movies. But despite Will's incredible enthusiasm and
I want to guess before this part gets over, Will is going to become a famous Hollywood actor, and he's somebody known now. Will. I'm trying to think of somebody's name in Hollywood. Will can't be Will Smith because it's a white guy. So I don't know.
naivete, when he got to Los Angeles, to Hollywood, he realized that he was not the only young person with this big dream. There were loads of aspiring actors and actresses who loved Hollywood and wanted to break in that were here, basically competing for all the same roles in all the same films. Now, this didn't deter Will. I mean, he wasn't totally shocked. Of course, people wanted to be big movie stars and come out here and try their hand. And so he went out and auditioned constantly. He didn't care what movie it was. He wanted to be in one, but he just was not getting the work. Nobody was picking him up. He was auditioning and being rejected over and over and over again. And Will was okay with that. He figured, okay, I'll get better and eventually get cast for something. But the problem was his finances. It was expensive to live in Los Angeles, and there really weren't all that many jobs available. I mean, during the day, Will really wanted to focus on just auditioning constantly, and so the only work he could reasonably take was sort of side gigs that he could work late at night or early in the morning. Except, again, there's so many people trying to do what Will is doing, aspiring actors and actresses, that basically all the side gigs in LA were sort of already taken. And so the only ones that were available to Will were like the bottom of the barrel side gigs, the ones nobody wanted. But, Will was determined and he was okay taking whatever was available. And so he ultimately got 2 jobs. He worked as a mascot for a fast food chicken restaurant where he basically would stand outside in a chicken suit and try to encourage people to go into the restaurant. And then at night, he would work as a limo driver, but for a very specific group of people. He was a limo driver for strippers who would go mostly to bachelor parties, and it was Will's job to drive them to and from these parties, and then also to go in with them and, sort of be the DJ, play some music for them. And then at the end of the night, he was in charge of picking up all the money and clothes that were kind of strewn about from the event and packaging it all up, putting everybody and everything back in the limo, and driving him back home again. Now, at first, Will just sort of accepted that this was his life, because eventually it was not going to be his life. He was going to break into Hollywood, and he wouldn't have to wear the chicken suit or drive the strippers around anymore. He could just be an actor, and he could do the thing he really wanted to do. But pretty quickly, Will realized that the opportunity to break in just wasn't really happening. But what was really happening is he was spending a lot of his time being the chicken suit guy and driving strippers around, because he had to pay his bills, and these jobs didn't pay very much, and so he had to kind of encroach on the daytime hours and work more hours during that time that he would like to be auditioning just to pay his bills. And then when he would audition, he just continued not to get cast. And so before long, it just sort of felt like he was working these two kind of awful jobs all the time, barely sleeping, so that he could just get rejected over and over and over again and not break into Hollywood? It was depressing. And ultimately what he decided to do was, I'm gonna quit one of my jobs. He decided he would quit the limo stripper job and just do the chicken suit job to buy a little bit more time during the day so he could audition a little bit more, and for a little while he would just put all of his effort into that and hopefully land a big spot. And if he didn't, well, then his big dream likely was not going to pan out, and he'd have to move back home. But on Will's final shift as a stripper driver, one of the strippers actually said something to him that totally changed his life. He was driving him around on their way to bachelor parties, doing this and that. And at some point, Will struck up a conversation with this woman. She was a stripper, but during the day, she too was trying to become an actress. Stripping was her side gig to make enough money to live in LA to try to break into the industry. It wasn't going great for her, but, she was enthusiastic and committed the same way Will was. And over the course of this conversation, she told Will that, in addition to auditioning and, working when you had to, you should also take this particular acting class. There's this one great class that all the biggest and best aspiring actors and actresses are taking, and lots of very successful actors and actresses have taken. Like, this is the one to get into. You really ought to divert some of your time during the day to going to this class. And for Will, he appreciated the input, but he's thinking that's not really going to help me. Right now, I don't need to learn how to act. That's going to take way too long. I don't need that. I need action. I need to audition. I need to just be given a role, and then my training will be on the job. I'll learn by acting, not by training to act. However, he's also thinking to himself as he's driving around all night and she's talking about how great this class is, that he's like, what? At the same time, though, my auditions have not gone well. Nothing's really going well. And so maybe I'll just go to this class once. She's going to be there. She wants me to go. I'll go with her. I'll go one time.
What if they're both famous now? What if they're married now? That would be amazing. Hold on.
Maybe it'll be good for me. And so he agrees to go. And so not long after this final shift where he has this sort of pivotal interaction with the stripper, he goes to the acting class, and the stripper is there and she's so excited to see him, and he makes his way in and he sits down, and at some point during the class, the instructor says, okay, we're going to pair you up with other people in the class, and you're going to act out a scene in front of everybody else. And so Will, he randomly gets paired up with this other actor who in fact had a real audition that night. The scene they were going to act out was actually going to be done in front of actual agency reps who had come to this class. They were there literally to see this other actor do this particular scene. Will was just being asked to basically play support and allow this other actor to do their scene and hopefully actually get the part.
But they
And
saw
Will
Will.
knows this. He's like going into this with, okay, I'm going to read these lines and you're going to kind of be the one really auditioning here. And it'll be in front of the whole class. It'll be, both cool to see a real audition and good exposure to the folks that are in the class. And so they do this scene, and Will, who really is just trying to play a good supporting person here, is so unbelievably talented. He's so
Yes,
into
I
the
knew it.
scene. His emotions come through so beautifully that he completely
Steals the show.
overshadows the other actor. Like he completely destroys them and comes out looking like the star that really he thought he was. And the agency reps were so blown away by it, they actually didn't cast the other actor who was supposed to be auditioning for this role. They basically said, no, we're not interested in you. We're going to cast Will in this role. Will basically stole the role from this other actor. And this moment would end up being so talked
Because the woman told him, just go to this class. Man.
about and so iconic that this virtual nobody stole the show and landed this role, that people began talking about Will in Hollywood, and wouldn't you know it, it led to his big break. Will began getting cast left and right as the lead actor, the starring role in Hollywood hit after Hollywood hit. Today, Will is one of the most famous and celebrated movie stars to have ever lived. He's won everything from Academy Awards and Golden Globes to People Magazine's Sexiest Man Alive. Will is his first name, but he's better
Ain't no motherfucking way. Ain't no motherfucking way. Son. Hold on. You telling me that, nigga, that's Brad Pitt. Nigga. Bro. Wow. Wow. I actually hope that's a real fucking story because that's genuinely fate. Like, that's actually fate. Like, bro.
Globes to People Magazine's Sexiest Man Alive. Will is his first name, but he's better known by his middle name, Brad. Brad Pitt.
Suddenly silence.
In early April of 1945, a 15-year-old girl named Etta curled up on a pile of blankets inside the basement of her aunt's house in Velp, which is a small town in the Netherlands. Etta's stomach hurt so badly, and she felt weaker than she ever had in her whole life, and this was because she was quite literally on the brink of starving to death. Etta was 5 foot 6 inches tall, but her weight had plummeted to just 88 pounds.
Oh my God.
She couldn't walk, she couldn't stand, and she could barely speak. She was probably within a couple of days of actually dying. And despite the fact that, her aunt and her mother were right down there with her in the basement, along with some other refugees that her family was housing in the basement with them, nobody had food to give her. And so as much as they wanted to help her, they couldn't. And on top of that, making this already terrible situation even worse, Etta, her family, and the refugees had literally been trapped down here in this basement, for months because it was way too dangerous to go outside. That's part of the reason they couldn't get food. Going outside was a death sentence in and of itself.
Because of the bombs and shit?
World War II was raging right outside. Bombs are being dropped, people are being shot, explosions left and right. I mean, they're totally trapped. So the country where Etta lived, the Netherlands, had been under Nazi occupation for almost 5 years at this point. When the Nazis had first taken over, Etta had been this strong, very energetic girl with dreams of becoming a professional ballet dancer. She'd been so young when the occupation began that she hadn't fully understood what was even happening. But then, Etta's uncle, who was a prominent anti-Nazi activist, had been captured and executed by the Nazis. And this really spurred Etta into action. I mean, she saw how serious this really was, and she was not just going to stand idly by. And so she had spent several years working with an anti-Nazi group called the Dutch Resistance, doing things like, performing ballet at secret fundraising events to try to raise money for this anti-Nazi movement, and also smuggling resistance newspapers all over the country. She'd even convinced her family to take in refugees and hide them from the Nazis, even though she knew that if she and her family were caught, they would all be killed. And all of this had given Etta a real sense of purpose. She felt like she was actually doing something tangible
become
to
a
fight
resistance
the Nazis.
fighter.
However, about 9 months earlier, the Nazis had cut off supply lines into the Netherlands, and since then, the entire country had been completely devastated. People had basically no food, they had zero access to medicine, running water, or electricity, and so
What's so insane to me is, bro, the Axis powers could have, I don't want to say easily, but they could have won World War II if Hitler was mentally competent. The Axis powers could have genuinely won World War II, and this was so horrifying. The just the other European powers at that time were extremely dumb. Just oh my god.
Etta, like many other people in this country, had begun to starve. And she'd gotten so sick and so weak that as she was starving, she couldn't do any work with the resistance at all anymore. All she could do was literally just lie in this basement and effectively wait to die. And that particular day, as she listened to the sound of planes, gunshots, and sirens going off outside, Etta prayed to God for help. But the only response she got was a high-pitched whistling sound, then a deafening blast. The floor shook, glass shattered, and everything went black. Sometime later, we don't know exactly how long, probably days, Etta came to. And unbelievably, as she looked around, despite effectively her basement being the target of a bombing run, she looked around and saw the basement's structural integrity had effectively held up, and her loved ones and the refugees and she were all still alive. But, Etta, she was not like, oh, great, everything's fine now. It was more like, okay, the Nazis are getting closer. And if they've bombed us just now, I'm bound to be bombed again, or I'm gonna starve to death, like the end is right on top of us. But as she kind of looked around and continued to take stock of the situation, she realized something was very different. Over the last several weeks and months, the constant bombardment of bombs and guns and sirens and chaos outside was near constant. But right now, even though they've just recently been bombed and barely survived, like the Nazis must be right on top of us, despite that, she's listening and she can't hear anything outside. There's no explosions, no gunfire, nothing. It's quiet. Etta and her family were much more confused than anything else. But eventually, they worked up the courage and, with the help of her mother literally carrying Etta, the group of them, along with the refugees, walked out of the basement to see what was going on outside. And when they got up there, what they found were the streets were full of Allied soldiers. And they saw Dutch people crying and hugging, saying it was all over. And that's when Etta, her family, and the remaining refugees that were with them realized the Allied soldiers had liberated their city. For the first time in nearly 5 years, they were now free from Nazi occupation. If that bomb had struck more directly on their basement, or if the war had simply gone on for even just one more day, Etta could have very easily died in that basement. Instead, she survived. Sort of against all odds, she survived. Shortly after coming out of the basement, the Allied powers didn't just liberate that city where Etta lived. They fully eradicated the Nazis across Europe. The Allies won, and World War II finally ended. And Etta, who basically shouldn't be alive at this point, went on to have this unbelievable post-war life. Before the war, Etta had dreamed of becoming a professional ballet dancer. But during the war, she had suffered all these injuries and really had been affected by malnutrition, and it left her with long-term health problems that effectively made dancing full-time not a possibility. So instead, she began modeling and acting. And eventually, she moved to Hollywood. And in 1953, so 8 years after nearly being blown up by the Nazis and starved to death by the Nazis, Etta starred in a movie called Roman Holiday. And she actually won an Academy Award for her performance. Even though World War II had taken a lot from Etta and her family. I mean, it had nearly killed her, and it also took away her dream of being a ballet dancer. Despite that, experiencing the war so intimately like she had been forced to, it had instilled this incredible poise and discipline and a real quiet strength in her that would make her one of the most successful actresses of all time. Etta was actually just her nickname, and when she started making it big in Hollywood, she abandoned it and began going by her full name, Audrey Hepburn.
I don't know who that is. I'm sorry, I'm young. She's beautiful though. I like this though. It seems like a change in scenery. You know, Olive. Well, I'm gonna say Olive because I haven't watched all of Mr. Ballen's videos, but you know, most of the videos I see is the strange, dark, and mysterious. This is more lighthearted, more heartwarming. I like this video. Healing hands.
One morning in the summer of 1889, a 36-year-old surgeon named William Halstead and his head nurse, 27-year-old Caroline Hampton, stood in an operating room prep area in the Johns Hopkins Hospital in Baltimore, Maryland. Dr. Halstead was the surgeon-in-chief of this hospital, and that morning, he and Caroline were getting ready for a surgery. Now, Dr. Halstead had already washed up and was prepped, and now he was watching Caroline very closely to make sure she followed his hygiene requirements exactly. Caroline stood in front of a row of sinks that were all filled with different cleaning agents. She started by washing her hands with scalding hot water and medical-grade antibacterial soap. Then she cleaned her nails with brushes and files. Then she dipped her hands in acid. And then she finally finished with a 5-minute soak in a highly corrosive liquid called mercury bichloride. Dr. Halstead ran a really tight ship, specifically when it came to hand washing. And this was the process he believed was the safest. And Dr. Halstead's theory that basically nuking your hands with cleaning agents before doing anything in the medical field actually made him sort of unique at the time, because this was 1889 and hand washing was just not very
It really
common,
wasn't that common.
not even in hospitals. Germ theory.
And this changed history. Well, I'll say Western history or American history, because I'm like 100% certain many other cultures or peoples wash their hands before doing many things, especially when it comes to the medical field. For example, I've read many texts on the Dogon tribe, like they have knowledge on cleaning their hands before doing anything or surgery like, and they had this knowledge for centuries. So I mean, it's like that for probably a lot of more people, but I think this is just more so like how hand washing began in American history, how it revolutionized American history.
Which is the idea that illnesses can spread by germs that we can't see, and they're all over us, on our hands in particular, and so we have to kill the germs to prevent the spread of illness, right? That theory, germ theory, was very new at the time. And truthfully, a lot of doctors at the time didn't believe in germ theory, which meant they didn't do things which we would now consider standard hygiene practice in hospitals, like, basic hand washing and regularly disinfecting tools and surfaces. And Dr. Halstead was a huge proponent of germ theory and aggressive hand washing. And so
I'm being honest, germ theory should be obvious though. I think that should be fucking common sense. If I'm being honest, like cleaning the equipment after it's used, that should be common sense. You shouldn't be using the same equipment for different patients. That's fucking stupid. And also, you should wash your hands. That should be common sense to me, though. Honestly, that's just insane.
Had instituted this whole multi-step awful hand washing routine for his whole surgical team at Johns Hopkins, and the results had actually been fantastic. He had one of the lowest surgical mortality rates in the whole country. But despite that, people still sort of thought Dr. Halstead was crazy, including his own staff who, complained about these highly corrosive cleaning materials that they were rubbing all over their hands all the time. Like, even if this worked, like, this was kind of awful. But despite that, Dr. Halstead was not about to change his protocol. He knew it worked, even if it hurt. But that particular day, as Dr. Halstead and Caroline sat there letting their hands air dry after dipping them repeatedly in acid, he couldn't help but notice when he looked over at Caroline that her hands and her forearms looked really bad. Like they were blistered and just totally damaged from clearly doing this process all the time. And Dr. Halstead, he just sort of felt bad about it. And the reason he felt bad about it was sort of twofold. One, Caroline never complained, even though obviously every day when she would do this procedure that he is forcing on her, she was hurting herself in the process, but she never complained. And so that's actually why he had elevated her to head nurse, because he thought she had such grit and determination and she believed in the process, and so he had made her head nurse. But the other and more prominent reason why Dr. Halstead felt sort of bad about Caroline in particular and the condition of her hands and forearms was because Dr. Halstead was secretly totally infatuated with Caroline.
I was just gonna say that he likes her.
Now, he had never told her that. This was something he kept completely inside because he, one, thought he was too old for her, and two, he just kind of assumed that she would never be interested in him. So he just carried this intense love.
I think he's about 11 years older. She's 27, I think he's 38. If I'm being honest,
of Caroline.
They both like grown, so this young
And was very protective of Caroline, but she didn't really know. And so that was why when he looked over and saw her clearly in pain but not complaining, that because of his love for her, Dr. Halstead really for the first time began to question his big hygiene process. He knew it worked, but
it worked, but I don't think you need to repeatedly dip your hands in fucking acid. Like that, you remove the acid, keep everything else, and I'm like pretty sure that would be amazing. Like,
cost. His beloved Caroline was suffering because of him. And worse, he was sort of trapped. He would love to tell her that she didn't have to do that. Let your skin heal. I'm so sorry, Caroline. But if he did that, if he made an exception for her and said, don't follow this process anymore, people would find out and it would totally undermine his credibility. His whole thing is he's like, everyone must follow this process to stop the spread of germs and stop the spread of illnesses. Everybody's got to do this. And so if he didn't make her, what does that say about him? And so as he's sitting there watching Caroline dutifully get ready for surgery, Dr. Halstead, for the first time, really began seriously considering if there was any way, any sort of workaround that maybe could lessen the pain for Caroline, just because he loved her. That was it. It wasn't a safety thing. It was just because he loved Caroline. But despite putting some real thought and energy into trying to come up with something to lessen the burden on Caroline, he just couldn't find a solution. All his solutions involved her not following the process, which he couldn't do. Fast forward to early 1890. So about a year after Dr. Halstead first really began considering how can he help Caroline not hurt her hands anymore. So about a year after that began to be a thing for him, and he's in his office and he's looking at his desk, and on his desk is this small package. And he hasn't opened it yet, but he's so excited. He's also kind of nervous, but he feels like this is it. This is the thing I've been waiting for. So over the past year, Dr. Halstead had continued to iterate on how can I help Caroline? How can I keep her from hurting herself? And eventually he had this huge epiphany. He came up with this sort of outside the box concept and he pitched it to a company and said, hey, can you help me make these? And now sitting in front of him on the desk was effectively the prototype of this strange thing he had come up with, which again was just to help his love, Caroline. And so Dr. Halstead took a deep breath, he walked over and he ripped open the package, and inside were these two strange looking objects. And he picked them up, and without any hesitation, Dr. Halstead took the two objects, he left his office, hustled down the hallway to the OR prep room where he finds Caroline. And she's getting ready to wash her hands, for an upcoming surgery. And he stops her and says, here. And he hands her the two objects. And he says, don't wash your hands. Just use these. And with a confused look, with her bloody and blistered hands, she took the two objects and said, okay. 1 week later, and already Caroline's hands and forearms were healing up beautifully. And also, Dr. Halstead, over the course of this week, was so excited about his prototype and the progress that he was clearly seeing in Caroline's skin condition that he finally worked up the nerve to tell Caroline how much he loved her. And Caroline would actually tell him that, believe it or not, I'm in love with you too. And before long, Dr. Halstead proposed to Caroline and they got married. However, it was not their love that sort of was remembered for generations to come. Instead, the only reason we know about these two is because of that prototype that Dr. Halstead came up with, what he gave to Caroline that ultimately saved her skin. It was the perfect workaround to his hygiene hand washing process. In fact, these objects that he created were so effective that he and everybody else, basically in medicine across the world, began to use these brand new tools. And so it is almost entirely because of one man's love for a woman that we now have arguably the most used medical tool in the world.
What?
Dr. Halstead inadvertently created the world's first ever rubber surgical gloves.
Okay. Okay. Um, Man, this was actually a really good video, bro. Like, this video was so different from the videos I usually see MrBallen do. Um, I like all three of those parts, bro. They were all so good, and that last one was so wholesome. I'm actually glad they got married because after a certain point, I was kind of getting a little vibe. Maybe they should hook up. But as usual, I don't have too much to say. If you did like this video, please like it and subscribe so I can continue making these videos. And I'll see you guys next time.